Today we are going to be doing another water-based clay of a female kneeling pose. This is grog clay. A lot of people have been asking me what type of clay that I use, and I just get whatever potters use. It's basically low fire red clay. You could also get it in different colors. It depends on whatever your ceramic supplier has. This is called Virginia Red, and it's got grog and it's low fire. The important thing is really the low fire. The reason I use grog is it has these little granules that help firing, and it also helps shrinkage. So kneeling poses are always much easier to do with water-based clay because the support is there, so the clay does not sink as much. And with this, you really don't even have to hollow out the insides because it's really not that thick. The size of the sculpture is in such a way that you don't have to hollow it out. It's not thick enough. It's not really going to break. And when you combine it with a grog sort of clay, you're not going to get a lot of shrinkage and it'll fire much better. Now we got the general structure of the body, and I'm going to start adding a little bit more of the details. I usually take one day to come up with the structure for a pose like this. This is a pretty simple pose, but it takes me about a day to fully kind of create the armature. And then the next session, I can finish it up if I wanted to do kind of like a quick sculpture. There are some sculptures I've done in the past that have taken, a week to do, but normally I try and finish things a little bit faster because I want to do more sculpture and give you guys a little bit more content. So I've been putting up quite a bit of stuff. So I'm adding a little bit of the anatomy, and also at this point I added a dowel, which is like a wood stick that holds the head to the torso. You can see the head is just a little bit too tall, but it'll sink down with the gravity of the clay. I also added another dowel in the arm. One thing I found is that after I pull out those sticks, you do not want to wait until the clay is too firm, because what happens is that the water disappears from the clay and it tightens up. So it's much harder. You want to do this initially in the beginning as a way to hold your clay for arms, legs. It really works out. And there is some flex with that stick, so you can create the bend of arms and legs. So I want to just create a general face. I'm not trying to create a portrait, but I want to be able to get better at portraits. I'm adding the scapula. One of the things I found is that the pose I'm using from postspace.com, it's a little bit flat. You want to find your reference that shows all the muscle groups and perhaps a little bit more dramatic lighting. One of the things that I run into problems is that flatness for a sculptor doesn't work that well. You want to be able to see around the model. You want to have plenty of reference, and postspace.com has got really good stuff. This particular pose was free from postspace.com, and you need to be in their mailing list. I really think they're one of the best reference for artists, for sculptors and painters, so check those guys out. I really like them. There's a couple other reference websites you can use, but that one's probably the best one. So I also try to keep very flat in the beginning. You can see I'm sculpting in the arms. I'm keeping everything as straight as possible, and I do like that faceted look. And now I'll come in with my raking tool and get rid of some of that geometry. That's just a way of blending muscle groups together. This is called the coccyx in the back, and it kind of goes into the hip. The back is a little bit flat on the reference, and that's one thing. You're just not going to get that level of quality that you would from a real person. As a sculptor, you kind of want to look around a little bit more. Even for the face, it's more difficult, but I think if you're not trying to create a portrait, these references are extremely good. And using my bristle brush, I just blend all the muscles together. You have to make sure that you have the skeleton right before you begin. One of the things I'm trying to do with sculptures is I don't want to become as rigid as I have been in the past. I want to be a little bit looser. So I'm trying to not use tools that would make me and force me to be very rigid. I want to be loose. So I use the brushes, I blend everything kind of together. And I think that's a better way. And, otherwise, like, everything looks kind of mechanical. So when I'm like sculpting legs, for example, I'll look at the bone, the muscles, and then I kind of just blend it all together. That's my future direction for sculpture, is to do more of that, just become a little bit more fluid. I think my sculptures, and maybe you guys can post in the comments, I think they've been a bit stiff, a bit wooden. And I think if I move away from that look, it's going to help out. That's why I use brushes and cloth. It keeps me from being too rigid. One of the things I like to use is the silicone brush tools, because any bone comes to the surface, I like to emphasize it, and just by touching the clay using the silicone, it creates this sheen and flatness, and often it makes it look like the bone is coming to the surface. And if you combine it with a little bit of this cloth, the cloth tends to make it look more like it's flesh. When you have something like the Metroid sculpture that I did, you just don't get that sort of benefit. The Metroid sculpture, all of it is pretty robotic, and I think I should have maybe created it a little bit more painterly. Now I'm adding a few details to the kneecap, the patella, and where the femur and the tibia and the fibula kind of join. That part is always very interesting to sculpt. I think my next sculpture might be a standing pose, a standing male pose, but I'm not sure yet. If you have any ideas, post in the comments below. I'm always interested in figuring out what would be a good next sculpture. There's been so many good suggestions. It's just I have to pick one and start it. So I'm trying to make the back just a little bit more muscle bound, because the photos are a little bit on the flat side. A little bit more detail on the face, trying to stick with the looseness. And I'll take that dental tool that I'm using, and I'll just create some hairs, just like a few strands of hairs here and there. Also, I'm trying to play with the light. I light the sculpture in such a way that when somebody puts it on a shelf or a table, I want it to look pretty good. I want the shadows to be very sharp. I want it to have some sort of look to it. I don't want it to be flat, and that's the problem with the photos I'm using. Photos generally tend to be flat. So you have the sternum, like this cloth works really well to blend all the muscle groups together. And even if you just blended everything together using this cloth, it would look pretty decent. So the arms, and working in this size, they're very thin. And that right arm, because it's so far away from the body, this thing is going to dry out the earliest. So you have to keep that in mind as it's drying, because it could possibly crack. Here's another vantage point from the top down, and you can see me and the sculpture for reference, and you can tell it fits pretty much on a bookshelf. So these little figure studies are great to do, but one of the problems is that you have to rely on very small tools to work, and I don't really like the super small dental tools for doing sculptures. I want to be just a little bit bigger with the tools, and that keeps my sculpture a little bit more gesturally. Now I'm blending some of the muscle groups together, and I'm kind of doing a crosshatch pattern across the muscles. Using a bristle brush, it's great because you can really blend everything together. Now, removing a little bit of the base, I don't think I need that much clay, and I'm so cheap that clay has gone up in price quite a bit because of shipping, and 2 boxes were $80 for clay, so it's definitely gone up in price. But you could always strain clay yourself, but that's not something I'm looking forward to. Just putting in some finishing touches and blending in some of the muscles using the cloth. If I scan this using the 3D scanner, it's not going to capture that sort of texture. It's just going to capture the major shapes, which is what I want. I'm more interested in the geometry rather than the texture. Going back to the face and hitting it with a brush. It's a flat brush, flat bristle brush. I still have the stick in there, but at some point you have to remove it. And if you wait too long, that stick's going to be very stiff. And if that happens to you, you don't have to remove it. The thing that it could possibly do is crack your sculpture, but if you leave it, the water will kind of shrink the dowel a little bit. You can put it in the kiln and still fire it. It'll just burn off the stick. But I've had sculptures in the past where I left it and they ended up breaking. So you have to keep that in mind when you're working on it. So we're coming to the conclusion of this very small figurine sculpture. And make sure you hit that like and subscribe, and I will post the next sculpture up pretty shortly. Thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next video.